The Silent Night of Los Alamos and the Awakening of the Demon, Harry Daghlian and the Blue Flash, August 1945. It was the twilight of the Second World War. The echoes of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had shaken the globe, introducing humanity to an unprecedented force of destruction. Yet, in the desolate deserts of New Mexico, within the depths of the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the secrets were far from exhausted. With the war's abrupt end, a 6.2 kilogram sphere of plutonium-gallium alloy, originally intended for a third target that was never bombed following Japan's surrender, sat quietly in the laboratory. Coated in a thin layer of nickel, the sphere felt slightly warm to the touch due to its internal radioactive decay. Outwardly, it was a harmless metallic ball. However, this sphere would soon enter the annals of history as the Demon Core, proving to humanity just how unforgiving the nuclear age could be. The first victim of this dark legend was a brilliant and promising 24-year-old American physicist, Harutun Krikor Harry Daghlian Jr. Part 1. Tickling the Dragon's Tail. The scientists at Los Alamos needed to thoroughly understand the limits of nuclear chain reactions. To accurately calculate how a nuclear weapon or reactor would behave, they had to experimentally determine the critical mass. These experiments were known in the laboratory's dark jargon as tickling the dragon's tail, and that was exactly what it entailed, pushing a dormant, massive, and lethal power to the very edge of waking up, only to pull back at the exact moment it was about to strike. The logic of the experiment was straightforward, but its execution was exceptionally perilous. The plutonium core sat in the center, continuously shedding neutrons into the surrounding air. If these neutrons escaped into the room, there was no danger. But if the core was surrounded by a neutron-reflecting material such as heavy tungsten carbide bricks, the neutrons would bounce back into the core, splitting more plutonium atoms and accelerating the reaction. If enough bricks were stacked, the core would go supercritical, initiating an uncontrolled, self-sustaining chain reaction. The physicist's grim task was to stack the bricks one by one, listen to the escalating clicks of the neutron counters, and stop just one step before the core reached absolute criticality. It was akin to jumping on thin ice and trying to predict the exact moment it would break. Part 2. The night of August 21, 1945. As the calendar turned to August 21, 1945, Harry Daghlian had stayed late at the lab. In the isolated facility known as the Omega Site, he had returned after dinner to continue his experiments. Strict security protocols dictated that such hazardous tests should never be conducted alone. However, the rushed atmosphere of the wartime era, insatiable scientific curiosity, and the overconfidence of youth led Daghlian to bend the rules. Besides him, the only other person in the room was Private Robert J. Hemmerly, a 29-year-old security guard sitting at a desk near the entrance, quietly reading a newspaper. The laboratory was silent. The only sounds were the low hum of the ventilation and the rhythmic, sparse clicks of the Geiger counters on the workbench. Sitting right in the middle of the table was the nickel-plated plutonium core. Daghlian began his work. He carefully picked up the dense, heavy tungsten carbide bricks and started building a reflective wall around the sphere. Each brick weighed about 4.4 kilograms, nearly 10 pounds. With every brick Daghlian placed, escaping neutrons were reflected back into the core, and the clicking of the radiation counters in the room accelerated. Click, 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 click. Initially slow, the tempo of the sound increased as the tungsten wall grew higher. Click, 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 click. Daghlian's entire focus was on the assembly. He was mentally matching his mathematical calculations with the data streaming from the instruments, anticipating exactly how close he was to the critical threshold. Everything seemed to be under control, but science operated under strict laws that forgave not even the slightest human error. Part 3. The Dropped Brick and the Fatal Mistake. The time was approaching 9:05 p.m. Daghlian observed that the tungsten wall surrounding the core was nearly complete. Only a few final pieces remained. He picked up a heavy tungsten carbide brick and slowly moved it over the center of the assembly. His intention was not to place the brick completely. He merely wanted to bring it close to see how the counters would react to the increased reflection. As the brick neared the core, the counters suddenly began to scream as if they had gone mad. The clicking sounds merged into a continuous, terrifying static hiss. The instruments were shouting a warning. "You have crossed the line!" Daghlian instantly realized the peril. Completing the structure with the brick in his hand would push the system into prompt criticality. He knew he had to retreat immediately. He made his decision and moved to pull his hand back, taking the heavy tungsten brick away with it. In that exact millisecond, whether due to exhaustion, the slickness of his protective glove, or a momentary lapse in concentration, disaster struck. The heavy tungsten brick slipped through Daghlian's fingers. The room did not go silent. Instead, time seemed to slow down. The brick fell through the air and landed directly on top of the plutonium core, sliding right into the final open gap with a heavy thud. Part IV, the blue flash and invisible fire. The moment the brick settled into place, the last escaping neutrons were trapped inside. The plutonium sphere instantly went supercritical. There was no nuclear explosion like an atomic bomb because the core lacked the external pressure to hold itself together, and the intense heat of the reaction would immediately cause it to expand and halt the process. But in that fleeting moment, an unspeakable amount of energy was released. The air in the room instantly ionized. A terrifying, supernatural, and brilliant blue light flooded the laboratory. This was the deadly blue flash known as Cherenkov radiation, caused by high-energy particles colliding with the atoms in the air. As the blue light illuminated the room, Daghlian felt a wave of intense heat wash over his skin, as if boiling water had been poured over him. Trillions of gamma rays and neutrons tore through every cell in his body at billions of miles per second. He suddenly tasted a sharp, metallic flavor in his mouth, a hallmark physiological reaction to immense doses of radiation hitting the human nervous system and taste buds. Private Hemmerly, catching the reflection of the blue flash, jumped from his desk in shock. In that moment, Harry Daghlian knew he had signed his own death warrant. As a physicist, he was acutely aware that the dose of radiation tearing through him had already poisoned him beyond salvation, yet, whether out of pure heroism or sheer reflex, he did not run. He lunged forward. If that brick remained where it was, the reaction would continue. The radiating heat would melt the core, and the entire building would become an uninhabitable, lethal zone, killing Hemmerly and anyone else nearby. Daghlian reached out with his hands, protected only by thin gloves, to grab the tungsten brick, which was already heating up rapidly from the radiation and the chain reaction. He tried to pull it off, but it was too heavy to grip properly in the panic. Without hesitation, he began to physically tear the assembly apart. He pushed the surrounding bricks one by one, knocking them off the table and onto the floor. As the system dismantled, the chain reaction ceased. The blue light vanished. The room returned to its normal, mundane lighting. The frantic screaming of the counters slowly subsided. It was over. The entire event had lasted merely a few seconds, but those few seconds had injected an estimated 5.1 sieverts 5 dram of neutron and gamma radiation into Daghlian's body. It was a vastly lethal dose. Part V, waiting for the inevitable end. As Daghlian hurried out of the room, he could already feel his hands tingling and growing numb. He told Hemmerly to get out and immediately called for medical help. The subsequent hospital stay was one of the most stark demonstrations of modern medicine's helplessness against the cruelty of nuclear energy. Within the first few days, Daghlian's hands, the limbs closest to the core as he dismantled the bricks, swelled to massive proportions and became covered in gigantic, fluid-filled radiation blisters. The pain was excruciating. Daghlian experienced the classic stages of acute radiation syndrome, ARS, one by one. After the initial severe nausea and vomiting, he entered a brief, latent phase. During this period, he felt remarkably better. He was even joking with friends and reading books in his hospital bed. But the radiation had already done its grim work at the cellular level, shredding his DNA. His body was simply incapable of producing new cells. Soon, the inevitable systemic collapse began. His hair fell out, his immune system failed entirely, and internal bleeding started. Throughout his illness, his colleagues from the laboratory came to visit him. One of them was the Canadian physicist Louis Slotin. As Slotin stood by his colleague's bed, watching him slowly deteriorate in agony, he had no way of knowing that, by a cruel twist of fate, he would share the exact same end with the exact same core just 9 months later. Harry Daghlian passed away on September 15, 1945, exactly 25 days after being exposed to the blue flash. He was only 24 years old. In his final days, he remained lucid, describing the effects of the radiation on his own body to his colleagues, attempting to offer even his own death as data for science. The security guard, Hemmerly, survived thanks to the much lower dose he received, about 31 rads, and lived until 1978. Part VI's, the birth of the Demon Core and its legacy. Harry Daghlian's death sent a chilling shockwave through Los Alamos. Humanity had brought the fire of the sun down to Earth, but had not yet learned how to dance around it safely. Following this tragic event, the plutonium sphere became an object of deep dread, belying its innocent, shiny appearance. The true moniker, however, was cemented in May 1946. During a similar criticality experiment conducted by Louis Slotin, a slipped screwdriver caused the core to emit a second blue flash, ultimately killing Slotin as well. Having consumed two brilliant scientists within months, the metal sphere would no longer be referred to by its scientific designation. It would be remembered as a dark legend, the Demon Core. Daghlian's story symbolizes the terrifying prices paid by those who wander the very edges of scientific progress. A dropped tungsten brick and the fatal blue flash that illuminated that room are etched into history as a chilling warning proof that the godlike powers humanity had unleashed would not forgive the slightest error, a slipping hand, or a tired mind. The Demon Core was ultimately melted down and used in a different weapons test in the summer of 1946, destroying it forever. Yet, the legend Harry Daghlian ignited on that dark night lives on as one of the most haunting tales of the nuclear age.